We know that in some rendering software where we render our architectural projects, the landscape areas we use in visualization are quite unrealistic, far from reality, and have more artificial images. What can we do to make these images more realistic? That is, to make the landscape part much more realistic? I will try to explain this. Let's make a comparison here. Look, this is a visual rendered in Lumion. As a result of the process, we can create a realism like this. We can achieve realism. For example, here we see a render made using artificial intelligence. In this render, frankly, the AI itself has created this in different ways. It actually looks quite good. But if we wish, we can also recreate the landscape areas here, just the landscape areas. At the same time, if we wish, we can also sharpen the project itself. What kind of result would we get? Look, let's see it right here. As a result of the process, the landscape areas are much clearer and more realistic. At the same time, the project itself is clearer. Look, while it's blurry like this, let's zoom in a bit and take a look. While it's blurry like this, as a result of the process, we achieve a much clearer image. Look, this is a very important, serious matter. Therefore, I want to show you now how we can do this. First of all, when we go to archifruits.ai.com, we have a module here called Papaya. This Papaya module also has a landscape boost feature. If you select Papaya Full, it performs this process on the entire visual of the project. Let's select our visual here. But if you select Landscape Boost, it will only perform this process on the landscape part, that is, these green areas we see, all the green areas in the visual. The edge part here, the rounding part, that is, we can determine how sharply it will round the edges while performing the masking process. I want to lower this a bit so it's not so obvious. Then you can choose 2K or 4K resolution here. If you choose 4K, it will also perform a sharpening process on the entire image. Therefore, I'm choosing 4K and leaving our creativity value at 0.35. If you increase it too much, it might shift things around a bit too much. It can make an excessive intervention in these landscape areas in the project. It can interfere too much with your structure, the structure of your visuals, or rather the structure of the landscape objects we have placed. Therefore, if you can leave it at 0.35 or 0.3, frankly, I don't recommend 0.3 much. But 0.35 would be very good, I think. If you want sharper images, you can increase it up to 0.4. I'm starting the process like this, and we'll see something like this as a result. Let's look here again. Look, when you look at the result, when you zoom in like this, while the visual was like this at the beginning of the process, we obtain a more realistic green area like this as a result. Here again, you see that all the green area landscape objects in the background have been modified and changed like this. Now let's move on to another part of the topic, which is this. When we perform this process with the same logic, look, we get an image like this. This is good. But if what we want is not this, but to sharpen it a bit more. I mean, for example, just sharpening the structure we see here right now without changing it in any way. Look, you can see the difference. Let me zoom in a bit more and show it clearly. While this was the previous state, the original state, this is how it looks after the sharpening process. We experience this problem especially on facades, in our materials, and in some details. Look, while the original state is like this, we can create a very clear image like this after the process. I want to show you how we do this as well. For this, we use the dragon fruit module here. The dragon fruit module right here. Yes. Look, here in the same visual, look, this is our visual in its unsharpened state. The visual that hasn't been sharpened yet. When we bring this and place it here, then select the 4K module and start the process, you will see. The visual resulting from this process will give us a much cleaner and sharper architectural visual. We're looking at our previous process. It took about 1.5 minutes right now. This can sometimes extend up to 2 or 3 minutes because it's performing a 4K process, and it can really bring this out cleanly as a result of a complex process in the background. Because its only task isn't to make the landscape object, the landscape parts, realistic, it's also to create a very good sharpening. Look, you see the project right now in a very beautiful way. It revisualized and sharpened it. If you want, let's take this and place it on Photoshop and look at the subject a bit more closely like this. Look, let's place it like this. Let's compare the last process we did with the one right below it. Look, while this was the previous state, the next state, in this way a sharpening also occurs in our architectural project in 4K. But never any distortion, friends. I want to say this. It just sharpens the project itself. It's really a fine process, a process that has been worked on a lot. I hope you find it useful and use it because these distortions that occur during the upscale process in our architectural projects really bother us a lot. But I think sharpenings like this and an upscale process like this will be very useful for us. I hope it was helpful. See you later.